The air in the room was cold and still. It smelled of ozone and cleaning chemicals. Frank sat in a metal chair, his wrists locked to the table. He was an old man. His face was lined and tired. His gray jumpsuit was dirty and torn at the shoulder. Across from him stood Commander Valerius. He was tall and sharp, his black uniform perfect. 2 guards in dark armor stood behind him, their faces hidden behind helmets. Valerius placed a single object on the table. It was a photograph sealed in plastic. It showed a younger Frank, a woman with kind eyes, and a little girl with a bright smile. They stood in a green field under a yellow sun. "We found this in the ruins," Valerius said. His voice was flat and hard. "Your colony's gone. We took everything of value in 6 hours. Your people are gone. Your wife and daughter are almost certainly dead. You are the last piece of a failed project." Frank did not look at the photo. He kept his eyes on Valerius. They were calm and steady. "You're predators," Frank said, his voice a low rasp. "You're efficient. You feel no pity. I can respect that." A thin smile touched Valerius's lips. He leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. "And you? You are old. Your body is weak. Your kind clings to memories and feelings. That makes you soft. That makes you prey." Frank moved then. He leaned forward as far as the chains would allow. The metal groaned. He was so close, Valerius could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "You are predators," Frank whispered. The sound was soft, but it cut through the silence. "But we are apex predators." The ship shook. It was not a small tremor. It was a violent, jarring impact that threw Valerius sideways. He caught himself on the wall. The red alarm lights flashed on, painting the room in blood-red light. A loud, piercing siren began to wail. Frank did not move. He remained perfectly still in his chair, his chained hands flat on the table. His expression did not change. The 2 guards stumbled toward the door, their weapons raised. Valerius straightened his uniform, his face a mask of confusion and anger. "What is happening?" he shouted over the siren. "Report." The door to the interrogation room hissed open. Instead of a report, a cloud of thick black smoke poured into the room. The sounds of fighting echoed from the hallway outside. The rapid crack of gunfire. The screams of men. One of the guards at the door was suddenly thrown backward into the room. He hit the floor and did not move. The other guard fired his rifle into the smoke-filled corridor. A single, precise shot answered him. He fell. Valerius drew his sidearm, his eyes wide, aimed at the doorway. A figure stepped out of the smoke. It was a soldier in scarred gray armor. The helmet was shaped like a skull. The name Kodiak was stenciled on the shoulder in white paint. The soldier held a heavy rifle, its barrel still smoking. The soldier's helmet turned, looking past Valerius. The voice that came out was a distorted growl. "You were late, old man." Frank looked up. For the first time, a real emotion showed on his face. It was not relief. It was impatience. "I had to be sure you were listening," Frank said. Valerius stared, his weapon forgotten in his hand. This was not a rescue. This was something else. Frank stood up. His hands were free. The cuffs hung open, broken. They'd never been locked in. He reached out and took the photograph from the table. He tucked it carefully inside his jumpsuit against his chest. He looked at Valerius, and the old man was gone. In his place was someone else. Someone cold and dangerous. "They did not come to rescue me," Frank said, his voice now clear and strong.
They are my ride.
"I was the target all along." The air in the corridor was thick with smoke. The red alarm lights pulsed like a sick heart. Frank stood over the fallen guards, his posture now straight and sure. The soldier named Kodiak tossed him a heavy pistol. Frank caught it without looking. The weight was familiar in his hand. Kodiak then threw him a small data chip. "Primary target data is loaded," Kodiak's distorted voice said. "Command wants the location. Their home fleet anchorage." The helmet tilted toward Valerius, who was still on his knees, clutching his sidearm. "He is the key." Frank chambered a round into the pistol. The sound was loud and final. Looked down at Valerius. His eyes were no longer calm. They were the eyes of a hunter. "Time to talk about your home," Frank said. Valerius stared up, his mind reeling. This was not a prisoner. This was a weapon they had brought aboard their own ship. "You are insane," he spat. One squad against a battle carrier. I will die here. Kodiak let out a short, harsh laugh through his helmet. We are not one squad. Another soldier appeared from the smoke. This one was slimmer, their armor marked with the name Raven. Raven held a tablet, fingers flying across its surface. The ship's security is trying to lock us down. I am creating a path. We have 7 minutes. Move, Kodiak ordered. Pushed into the hallway. Frank walked beside Valerius, the pistol held low and ready. The corridor was a wreck. Sparks fell from broken panels in the ceiling. The bodies of crewmen lay on the floor. The air smelled of burned wiring and blood. They moved fast. Raven would point, and Kodiak would kick open a door or blast a control panel. They were not just fighting, they were dismantling the ship piece by piece. They entered a wide hallway. A group of 4 enemy soldiers was setting up a heavy weapon. They saw Frank's group and opened fire. Plasma bolts scorched the metal walls. Kodiak and Raven returned fire from behind a support column. The noise was deafening. Frank did not take cover. He moved. He shoved Valerius behind a fallen crate and kept going. He ran low and fast along the wall. His movements were smooth for an old man. He was a shadow. Came up behind the enemy squad. 2 quick shots. 2 soldiers fell. The other 2 turned, surprised. Kodiak cut them down. Frank stood over the heavy weapon, placed his pistol against its power core and fired once. The weapon exploded in a shower of molten metal. Valerius watched, his blood running cold. These humans did not fight to capture, they fought to erase. They reached a lift. Raven sliced the control panel. The doors opened. Inside, a lone medic was treating a wounded officer. The medic looked up, eyes wide with fear. Kodiak raised his rifle. No, Frank said. His voice was quiet, but it stopped Kodiak cold. Frank looked at the medic, then at the wounded man. He shook his head once. Kodiak lowered his weapon. The lift doors closed, leaving the medic unharmed. Valerius looked at Frank, confused. Mercy? From an apex predator? Frank turned to him. His face was hard. That was not mercy. We do not waste bullets on those who are no longer a threat. We are not butchers. We are hunters. Raven pointed down a new corridor. The bridge is that way, 200 meters. Their commander will have the fleet data. Frank nodded. Good, let's go pay him a visit. They started down the corridor. It was clear and quiet, too quiet. The alarms had stopped. Only sound was their own footsteps. Then, a deep, grinding noise came from ahead of them. A massive, armored door, 3 feet thick, began to slide down from the ceiling. It was a bulkhead lockdown door. It was going to seal them in. From behind them, another identical door began to descend, cutting off their retreat. Raven sprinted to a control panel. Her fingers danced across it. I cannot stop it. The command is coming from the bridge. It is a trap. They were being sealed in a metal box. The final door ahead of them was only a few feet from the floor. Kodiak looked at Frank. They have us. Frank watched the closing door, his expression unreadable. Then, from the other side of the nearly sealed doorway, a figure stepped into view. It was a man in a commander's uniform. He stood there, just on the other side of the narrowing gap, looking in at them. He smiled. It was a wide, triumphant smile. He raised his hand. In it was a small black remote. Goodbye, the commander said. The massive door slammed shut with a final deafening clang. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. They were trapped. The red light from the emergency strips on the floor painted their faces in blood-like shadows. The commander on the other side of the thick window gave a final mocking wave. He held up the black remote for them to see. Then he turned and walked away. Frank's team was sealed in a 20-foot-long section of corridor, a metal coffin. What is that remote for? Kodiak growled, his helmet scanning the walls. Raven was already at a wall panel, prying it open. The section is marked for emergency jettison. It is a self-destruct protocol for sensitive areas. A deep, vibrating hum started up beneath their feet. The floor began to thrum. A low rumble built in the walls. He is going to blow us out into space, Frank said. His voice was calm. Valerius laughed. The sound was sharp and broken. You see? You lose. You die here in this box. Frank ignored him. He looked at Raven. Can you stop it? Raven's hands moved inside the panel, pulling wires. The sequence is hardwired. It is a dead man's switch. I can delay it. Maybe 60 seconds. No more 60 seconds. Kodiak slammed his fist against the door. It did not even dent. Frank turned to Valerius. Override it. Valerius leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. His fear was gone, replaced by a cold victory. Why would I do that? The override needs a senior officer's biosignature and a code. I will die before I help you. Frank did not argue. He raised his pistol and shot Valerius in the leg. The sound was huge in the small space. Valerius cried out and collapsed, clutching his thigh. Blood seeped through his fingers. Frank grabbed him by the collar and dragged him to the door's control panel. He forced Valerius's hand onto the bioscanner. A light blinked green. The code, Frank said. Now Valerius was panting, his face white with pain. He looked up at Frank, his teeth clenched. Never. The humming grew louder. A metal grinding sound started. The entire section shuddered. They were running out of time. Frank looked at the countdown Raven had pulled up on her tablet. 30 seconds. He made a decision. He looked at Kodiak and gave a single, sharp nod. Kodiak understood immediately. Raven, Grendel, on me. He moved to a section of the wall, kicking open a small service hatch. It was a tight fit, a maintenance conduit. It would not save them from the explosion, but it was the only cover they had. Raven and the other soldier, Grendel, scrambled inside. He hauled the struggling Valerius back to his feet, holding him in front of the console. You wanted to see an apex predator? Frank said, his voice low in Valerius's ear. We do not just hunt, we sacrifice. The countdown hit 5 seconds. Frank shoved Valerius away from the console. The commander fell to the floor, stunned. Then Frank turned. Instead of running for the conduit, he turned toward the power core of the control panel. It was a mess of wires and glowing energy cells. He took 2 quick steps and slammed his body into it. There was a blinding flash of white light. A shower of sparks erupted from the panel. The smell of burned flesh filled the air. Frank cried out, his body convulsing as electricity arced through him. The deep humming stopped. The grinding ceased. The countdown on Raven's tablet froze. 2 seconds. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of dying electronics. Frank slumped to the floor. His body was still. Smoke rose from his back. Kodiak rushed from the conduit and knelt beside him. He rolled Frank over. Frank's eyes were open. They were full of pain, but they were focused. He grabbed Kodiak's armored wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. Did we get it? Frank grunted, his voice raw. Kodiak held up the data chip. It was undamaged. We got it. The location of their central fleet. The war ends here. Frank gave a slow pain nod. Good. He tried to sit up, but a spasm of pain racked his body. He coughed, and a trickle of blood ran from the corner of his mouth. Kodiak's helmet hit his face, but his voice was tight. You are hurt. Bad. Frank looked past him, toward the main door. The lights on the panel were dark. It was dead. The door. Frank whispered, I killed the power. You cannot open it from in here. They were still trapped. Now Frank was dying. Frank lay on the cold floor, breathing in shallow gasps. The air smelled of burned flesh and ozone. Kodiak knelt beside him, applying a thick gel from a medkit to the blackened wound on Frank's back. Frank did not make a sound. The door is dead, Raven confirmed, her voice flat. She slapped the unresponsive control panel. The whole grid for this section is fried. We are sealed in. Valerius watched from where he sat, clutching his bleeding leg. A bitter smile was on his face. So the great predator dies in a cage. A fitting end. Kodiak ignored him. He looked at Grendel, the other soldier. Blow it. Grendel nodded, moved to the massive door and started fixing small brick-like charges to the hinges. The soft click of the magnets was the only sound. Frank's eyes were closed. His hand fumbled at his chest, inside his jumpsuit. He pulled out the plastic-coated photograph. The edges were slightly melted. He looked at the faces of his wife and daughter. His thumb brushed over their image. We need a path to the hangar bay, Kodiak said to Raven. The second we blow this door, every soldier on this ship will come for us. Raven was already working on her tablet. I can trigger a false alarm in the engine room. It might pull some of them away. but it will not give us much time. Grendel finished setting the charges. Ready, Kodiak looked at the team. On 3, we move fast. We do not stop. Frank tried to push himself up. His arms shook. Kodiak moved to help him, but Frank waved him off. I can walk. His voice was a dry whisper. He shoved the photo back into his jumpsuit and, using the wall, forced himself to his feet. He swayed, but he stood. They moved to the far end of the corridor, taking cover behind a structural beam. Fire in the hole, Grendel said. Sharp, concussive boom filled the space. The flash was blinding. The door did not open. It fell inward with a groan of tortured metal, hitting the floor with a crash that shook the deck. Dust and smoke billowed out. The way was open. Go, Kodiak yelled. They ran. Frank moved with a grim, lurching gait, one arm pressed to his chest. Kodiak stayed right beside him, his rifle snapping up to fire at 2 enemy soldiers who appeared from a side corridor. They fell. Alarms blared again. New ones, the engine alarm Raven had set. They sprinted down a wide main corridor. The hangar bay was just ahead. Through the large observation windows they could see their ship. It was a small, fang-shaped craft, its boarding ramp down. It was their way home. Then, a reinforced security door began to slide shut in front of the hangar entrance. It was the last line of defense.
I am Raven,
Kodiak shouted. I cannot stop it. It is a separate system. They were not going to make it. The door was already halfway closed. Frank stopped running. He looked at the closing door, then at the fang-shaped ship waiting beyond it. He looked at Kodiak. Go, Frank said. His voice was clear and strong. That is an order. Kodiak hesitated for only a second. He saw the look in Frank's eyes. It was not a request. It was a final command. He nodded once, a sharp military gesture. Grendel, Raven, go, Kodiak yelled. The 3 soldiers poured on a final burst of speed, sliding under the closing door just before it sealed with a heavy thud. Frank was left on the other side, alone. He turned, his back to the sealed door. He raised his pistol. The corridor behind him was filling with enemy soldiers. Dozens of them. They advanced slowly, their weapons raised. Frank stood his ground. He was one old wounded man against an army. He did not look afraid. He looked resolved. He pulled the photograph from his jumpsuit one last time. He did not look at it. He just held it in his hand. Then he let it fall to the deck. He raised his weapon, aiming at the approaching soldiers. A grim and defiant smile touched his lips. His final words were not a scream, but a statement, spoken into his cums for Kodiak to hear. Tell them the old wolf's last hunt was a success, Frank said. Now, unleash the pack. Kodiak heard Frank's last words through his helmet.
Ow.
The channel went dead. He stood on the ramp of their ship, his hands clenched into fists. Raven and Grendel were already inside, the engines whining to life. We have to go, Grendel said from the cockpit. Now, Kodiak took one last look at the sealed door. He saw nothing through the thick window. He turned and ran up the ramp. It closed behind him. The fang-shaped ship lifted off the hangar deck. It shot forward, weaving through the chaos of the carrier's internal bay. It blasted through the energy field containing the atmosphere and soared into the blackness of space. Behind them, the enemy battle carrier was a wounded giant. Fires burned in its side where Frank's team had broken through. Plot a course for the rally point, Kodiak ordered, pulling off his helmet. His face was grim and smeared with sweat. Raven worked her console. The data is secure. It's transmitting the fleet location now. They watched the main screen as the carrier grew smaller behind them. It looked like they had escaped. Then, something changed. New ships dropped out of light speed. Not 1 or 2. Dozens. They were sleek and gray, shaped like knives. They moved in perfect, silent formation. They were human ships. They did not hail the carrier. They did not demand a surrender. They simply opened fire. A storm of plasma and railgun fire slammed into the battle carrier. Shields flared and died. The ship's hull cracked open like an egg. Explosions bloomed along its length, silent and bright in the vacuum. It was not a battle. It was an execution. In less than a minute, the massive carrier was an expanding cloud of gas and debris. Kodiak watched, his face hard. Frank's message had been received. The pack was unleashed. One of the new ships, a destroyer, moved alongside their small craft. A secure channel opened. A woman's face appeared on the screen. She had sharp eyes and gray hair. Her name was Commander Vance. "The data is confirmed," she said, her voice all business. "We have the location of their home fleet. The final offensive begins in 6 hours." Kodiak nodded. Frank, he did not make it. Vance's expression did not change. He completed his mission. That is what matters. She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "We are receiving a weak signal from the carrier's debris field, a survival pod. Its beacon is active." Kodiak straightened up. "A pod? From that?" He gestured to the wreckage. "Nothing could have survived that destruction. The beacon is old model. Human," Vance said. "It is one of ours." A cold feeling settled in Kodiak's stomach. Frank's survival pod. It must have launched in the final seconds. "We have to retrieve it," he said. Vance shook her head. "The area is too hot. Enemy reinforcements are already en route. We cannot risk a ship for one man. He is likely dead from the blast." "He is not dead," Kodiak said, his voice low. "He is too stubborn to die." On the screen, a small blinking light appeared amid the field of wreckage. The survival pod's beacon was still broadcasting. "The order is to withdraw, Kodiak," Vance said firmly. "That is a direct command." Kodiak looked at the blinking light on the screen, thought of the old man, alone in the dark. He turned to Grendel. "New course." Grendel looked from Kodiak to the screen showing Commander Vance. She said no. "It is a suicide run." Kodiak stared at the beacon. Frank had sacrificed everything for the mission. For them, he would not leave him behind. "Plot the course," Kodiak said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "We are going in."